Okay, hi Michael, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Doug, I'm fine. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So you're here to talk about a book called Royal Edge. Before we get to the book, though, can you give us a little bit of your backstory? Tell us what you've been doing with your life.
Yes. Grew up in Lincolnwood, Illinois. Uh, Started school there at 5 and stayed there, throughout high school. So I still have friends today from having grown up in Lincolnwood. From there, I went to lucky enough to be accepted to Princeton, and I spent 4 years, graduated from Princeton, uh, and then began a career in architecture and the management of large construction projects. Chicago, is the home of some of the tallest buildings in the world, and I was lucky enough to work with some of the very people that created those projects, and that's been my career. I was raised in a family with plenty of cousins and plenty of family support. Um, Beyond that, extremely pleased with my career and my family life.
So you were an architect, right?
Yes.
Are you currently retired?
I'm basically retired, but I do pick up the phone if someone who knows me, has something they'd like me to work on. And as we speak, there's a project in West Hollywood that I've been working on, a fairly large apartment complex, and I'm helping them on what's referred to as the entitlement stage, the right to build a project. Eventually, it could and should actually be built. So basically retired, but if the phone rings and it's interesting, I jump on if I can.
So when did you start writing?
So I've always had an interest in written expression, but the writing that developed into this book really started with my recollection of things that happened to me at the point in time I graduated from Princeton. Years after Princeton, having been married and having three daughters, we would go on these long hikes in Europe. We'd walk the Cotswolds. Not challenging elevation changes, but long hikes, sometimes 7, 8 days. Ireland, Scotland, beautiful scenery, and sometimes the hikes were very difficult for the girls. And I started talking about this woman I met after I graduated from Princeton, a much older woman, and I started telling stories about the Countess. And they wanted to hear more stories. At times, they jokingly would say, it was just to get their mind off the pain of hiking. But later, I realized that the stories were meaningful and relevant to their growth, and it eventually developed into a book. When I would hike on my own, take long walks, I would tape record my recollections, and eventually assembled it into Royal Edge.
Is this your first published book?
It is my first published book, yes.
Okay. How long did it take you to write it? I'm curious.
The tape recording part, the storytelling, you collect that all, was a good 3 or 4 years. The actual writing part, maybe 18 months.
18 months. Okay. Did you self-publish it or did you find a publisher?
I self-published it, so it's available on Amazon and several other outlets like Goodreads.
Okay, so this book is a recollection of your encounter with this countess?
It is the telling of my state of mind when I graduated from Princeton, and most of it takes place while I'm living in this house in Princeton with Ella, 9 months. But I bring in before, I bring in the after, but it's the lessons I learned about life while sitting at her table.
Was she a student there?
Interesting. Ella was about 80 years old. She, as it turned out, was a great granddaughter of the Tsar Alexander II. So she lived in town on her own. A priest had been living in a room in the house that she lived in and left about a week before I arrived, and that's why they, meaning Ella, her sister, who visited on weekends from New York, were so welcoming and gave me the opportunity to live there. So there were a group of Russians that had left the old aristocratic Russia and moved to places like New York and in Princeton. There was a community there in Princeton that she was not so actively involved with. But so here you have a much older woman at the end of her life, a young man at the beginning of his life, and it's the sitting at her table, the listening to her stories, and the guidance I got from her that stuck with me through my entire life. At the same time, I believe I offered her companionship and many joyful moments of spending time together.
Why was she there?
The Russian royal community, those lucky enough to survive that left, some went to various parts of Europe, some came to New York, and she had friendships that brought her to the town of Princeton. Those friends passed on and moved. One moved back to France. The Maritain family, a very well-known existentialist writer of Christian philosophy. And when the Maritains moved on, they offered Ella and her husband, Arthur Larrey, to live in the house on Linden Lane that I eventually took a room in. Her husband, who was a well-known composer, and he was a ghostwriter for Igor Stravinsky. You can hear Stravinsky's wife talk about him. They lived together there up until about a year and a half before I arrived, when Arthur Larrey passed away. So Elizabeth was there by herself, living out her final years with friends and family, visiting on weekends, mostly from New York City.
So was she an escapee from the Bolshevik Revolution?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that makes sense.
And part of the story is part of Royal Edge is my recounting the story that she told me when just the two of us were sitting at the dining table one night, of the things that she did that led to her successful escape when so many of her family were ultimately slaughtered.
Can you give us a little bit of that story? We've got about 4 minutes.
Yeah, so it was one of the evenings. We're sitting there dinner table, and she's telling me that when she was very young, 18, 19, she, through some relationships with cousins that worked in a military hospital. There were two sets of military in Russia those days, those that were on the revolutionary side and those that were the defending the crown. And she wanted to work in a hospital, and her family, the royal family, frowned upon it. And she took off as a young girl, and she went to St. Petersburg, and she worked in a hospital. That led to her meeting someone, a soldier that had lost his leg. She went to extreme efforts to get an artificial leg replacement. In a surprise years later led to her getting assistance from that Royal Army that helped her escape. And it was a stunning story of a young person taking their life in their hand, listening to their elders, but not taking their advice, and it ultimately leading to her survival.
So she got out of Russia. Presumably, she went through Poland. I mean, there wasn't jet airplanes in those days. So
Yeah, she worked her way down south, Ukraine,
yeah, okay.
the coast of Europe, and then she worked her way back as a former royal, lived in Paris. That's where she was married to Arthur Larry. Arthur, a former, was previously Jewish. A lot of Jews converted to Christianity. And he was moving towards an opening night of a performance at the Paris Opera House, and the Nazis moved in on Paris, and his opening night never took place. Eventually, Arthur and Ella moved to New York, and then to Princeton. But while that's all going on, I'm telling my story about dealing with a friend of mine had already died in Vietnam, that the likelihood that I would be drafted, and how I would face that decision. So you graduate from Princeton in a somewhat American royalty, and all of a sudden the government's got control of your life with the draft. So we found common ground in sharing stories.
Did you ever get drafted?
So I did not in the end, and the reason I didn't was because in 1971, the draft law came up for extension, and there were debates in Congress that held up draft advancement at that time for several months. And during that time, when I would otherwise likely have been called, I wasn't. You were only eligible for 1 year. So at the end of my graduation year, after I'd been in Ella's house for about 9 months, I was no longer subject to the draft.
So the book is called Royal Edge. You did say you self-published it, so it is available now?
It is available. You can go on to Amazon. You can see reviews. I just read another one this morning. And then I also have a website now if someone wants a little more information.
Yeah, give us the website.
michaelpepper.net.
All right, we'll put that up. You mentioned some reviews. How are the reviews for your book? They good?
They've all been excellent. So I'm very grateful for the reviews. I love seeing when someone has taken it in and it's influenced their life. A simple joy of reading, or actually, advice that they take to heart. So I think they've been excellent. I'm very pleased. I, of course, would like to expand my audience.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on this show. It was nice meeting you, nice chatting with you. Best of luck with the book. Hope it does well.
Thank you very much.